Welcome to the Alldus podcast, Women in ServiceNow series, a brand new series dedicated to showcasing the incredible women leading the way in the ServiceNow ecosystem. With your host, Ailsa Cassie, each episode will bring you inspiring conversations with trailblazing women who are driving innovation, breaking barriers, and shaping the future of ServiceNow. Whether you're an aspiring leader, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the impact of female leadership in the tech space, this podcast is your go-to source for inspiration and empowerment. Join us on this exciting new journey as we dive into the stories, challenges, and triumphs of the remarkable women making their mark within the ServiceNow ecosystem.
Today, I am speaking with the Managing Director and Head of UK, Ireland and Africa's ServiceNow Business Group for Accenture. It's lovely to speak with you today, Nerys. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Elsa. Really pleased to be here as well.
Yeah, so you've had such an interesting career path already, and I'd love to hear about your journey to now.
All right, yeah. Now, I have had a very different career path, I suppose, in the sense of I've done lots of different roles, which actually I always encourage people to do, as much kind of different roles and variety, especially early on in your career, because then you understand kind of, what you really like doing, what you don't like doing so much. But, like this is going to age me terribly. My first ever kind of job in IT was in my kind of sandwich year at university. So I did 2 years at university, a year work placement, and then obviously a year back at uni, which I would really encourage actually anyone to do. At the time, my degree was sponsored by Intel, and there's a lot of focus on kind of vocational kind of experience as well, which was really good. And so I went and worked for Xerox Business Services. And I remember kind of going in on the first day and they said to me, oh, well, everybody that interviewed you has kind of left now because we're about to go through a period of outsourcing. So they've sort of moved on, but we haven't got our outsourcing kind of company in yet. So you and this contractor are basically kind of running the show. And I remember thinking, nice. Oh, my God. I've done 2 years of theory, if you like, at university, and now I was responsible for kind of the service desk, the second line support, managing all the kind of third parties with a really lovely contractor that was, trying to help me, but it was a quite a daunting task actually. And I remember coming in one day and the network had gone down and I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And I ended up sort of sitting in the server room and finding all these manuals, and it's like, you remember, this is 1997, so it's not quite as easy to Google things as it is now. And I remember going through all these Novell NetWare manuals, kind of going, oh my God, what do I do? And I managed to get it up and running, and I was like, right, okay, cool, and I had lots of different kind of dramas, if you like, that I had to kind of address. And it was a really great experience for me, because actually right from day one, my first ever experience in a kind of a proper job was being thrown in the deep end. And I've always kind of said, there is nothing better than being thrown in the deep end, ideally with a bit of support, so that you can kind of really push yourself and learn more. And actually, I kind of, when the outsourcing company came in, I moved into a different role. I moved into a role where I was doing a lot of kind of like testing and working as like an analyst developer for a new product that they were rolling out as well. So it was really good. I had the kind of like the network and the infrastructure and kind of server operations, as well as the service desk type experience. And then I also had the kind of application development type experience as well. So that was great. And then I went back to uni for a year. And then I came and I joined ICL as a graduate. And ICL, again, any graduate scheme actually, or most of them today, they allow you to kind of move around and try different things. And again, I kind of went more into the infrastructure side of things. And to be honest, I kind of did that for about 6 months. And I was like, it's not really that interesting, for me. I kind of thought I wanted to do something more. And at the time, there was the .com boom, and it was like everything was, website. So I remember getting myself a book on ASP in a nutshell, it was called. I remember it as if it were yesterday, actually. I remember thinking, okay, I've done VB at university, so I'm just going to go through, this is VB script, this should be even easier. And I just kind of like went through and taught myself it, and then managed to get a role in the web design studio. And from there, I worked on the Sega Dream Arena, which was like super cool. Like the first kind of online game arena. Again, I talked to some of the graduates that work in my team, and I'm like, oh yeah, I worked on the Sega Dream Arena. And they're like, I have no idea what that is. And I was like, well, it's a bit like Fortnite or Roblox, but like years and years ago, and not as good as that. And by doing that, I really got into the kind of development side of things. And this is where, and I also tell a lot of people this when I go out and talk to, especially kind of young girls. I've done some work where you go into schools and try and encourage kind of girls into IT. I say to them, you know, IT is super creative. The amazing thing I love about development is you have an idea in your head, you have an outcome that you want to drive, and then you make it happen and you make it a reality. And it's really, really exciting. And there's like, you know, there's nothing you can't do, I always used to say, and I still say that, right? And so I love the fact that I could take that kind of, you know, that concept, turn it into a reality quite quickly. So that was kind of super exciting. And then, you know, I spent quite a few years on the development side of things as well. Then, you know, when I left ICL, I went and worked for Thales. Thales are like a large kind of aerospace and defence company, and I was more, again, rather than being on the consulting and kind of system integration side, I'd gone client side. And again, I think that's really quite good from a career perspective if you can kind of have the consulting SI side, but also have that real kind of client business side, because you understand the dynamics on both sides of the fence type thing. I kind of started building workflows, right? And I remember the first kind of challenge that I had was, okay, we need to basically create like a IT service management tool, right? So I was like, no worries, I'm going to create a web-based front end, right, so that everybody can use it, be nice and easy, and we're going to, you know, workflow the request and the fulfillment, the incident management piece, and the change management piece. Didn't do problem management, if I remember rightly. And so I built it. I built that as my first workflow. I then built a holiday booking workflow system, and then I went on and I built things like fault incident reporting systems for the manufacturing line, obsolescence reporting systems, a procurement request management system. And it's really funny, actually, because when I look back on it now, I'm like, oh my God, I basically started building out these kind of like workflows, like what ServiceNow did. If only I'd had the foresight to kind of, you know, try and take it bigger, you know. But what was really great about that, and I say this to a lot of people that I've kind of coached and stuff over the years, is when I was in Thales, I was very much an analyst developer, right? Yep. So when I was looking at the fault incident reporting kind of solution, for example, I had no idea how a production line worked, and I had no idea about, you know, lots in a manufacturing process. But I had to learn all of that, because I had to learn, okay, what's the problem here? How can we drive some efficiencies in that? So I absolutely looked at it from a process point of view, and then I developed it. And it's so important to this day, I think, that, you know, if you're a technical person, you've really got to understand that business process, because otherwise, it can be, it's not exciting if you're removed anyway from the business process. Let's face it, you know, you need to understand the why, but also so that you actually develop the best solution. And if you're more a business person, understanding how you can leverage the technology to apply to that, you know, that's the most critical skill, I think, for anybody in technology.
Completely. And it definitely sounds like in many situations you've either been thrown in the deep end or you've thrown yourself in the deep end, and you've never been really scared of a challenge. And I think I speak to a lot of people that have the capacity and the ability to do a lot of things, but maybe shy away from it because they don't feel confident in themselves. So I guess where is it that you kind of find that inner belief all the time that you were able to do something that you set your mind to, and how could you recommend that people do the same?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't always kind of like think like that. I do sort of distinctly remember a point in time when I sort of said, do you know what, like, why don't I just try and go for, you know, this role? And when I was in Thales, I went for a role as a solution architect that was kind of 2 levels above me. And I remember thinking at the time, you know, I've done a really good job in what I'm doing. Yep. Like, I'd seen others doing that role, and I sort of realised, you know, I thought, well, actually, I think I'm just as capable as them in doing it. So I thought, well, you know, what kind of harm could come from actually kind of putting myself forwards and saying I want to do this, because I knew that I didn't want to stay doing what I was doing. So yeah, I just thought, you know what, you got to be in it to win it type thing. I knew I wanted to change. I knew actually, I suppose that, before, if I hadn't known something, I'd learned it. And I thought, right, I'm just gonna kind of ask, and I'm going to apply for this. And actually, they gave me the role only one grade higher initially, which was kind of to be expected. Let's face it, I was unproven in that area. Yeah. And then within 6 months, they moved me up again to that original level, because I proved myself. And I think, it's kind of, I think we can all sit there and assume everybody else is so much better than us. And it's really easy. We always remember the times that we messed up. We never really remember the times when we absolutely smashed it out of the park. And you've just got a kind of, I am quite positive about things, because I can sort of think, as I say, what's the worst that can happen? And then once you've done it a couple of times, you then go and get comfortable actually with kind of pushing yourself. And I said to somebody the other day, I said, if I don't have at least once a week a bit of a lurch in my stomach where I'm like, oh my God, is that the right thing to do? I don't think you're pushing yourself enough. And even now, I have this, right? You have to continue to take risks, and you have to continue to kind of push the boundaries. And so you have to be, it's a bit of a cliche, but be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, right? And relish that.
Completely, I know. And it definitely sounds like you've never really kind of settled for where you are. You're always kind of looking to the next step of what you can achieve next. And how do you kind of set that continuous goals for yourself? Like, what do you take into account, and how do you know that you want to get to the next step in your career?
I've always been quite flexible in terms of what route I take in my career. So I know some people have a very kind of clear view. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and then this role. I kind of look at it slightly different. I look at, okay, what's the end role that I want to do? And that has changed over the years. So, initially when I started thinking like that, I wanted to be a chief technology officer, basically, in an organisation. And by that, I mean the ultimate overall chief technology officer. So with that, I as my goal, I suppose, every role that I looked at, okay, does this help me towards that? Is this helping me with broader architectural experience, for example? So I went from solution architecture, did some roles around kind of managing some different teams, like a Microsoft team and a big AMS team. But then I went into enterprise architecture as well, because actually I thought from a CTO perspective, that's a really, really key skill that you need to have. Now my kind of ultimate goal, I mean, I would love to be in like a CEO position, like ultimately. And what do you need for that? You need to have experience of running a business, running a P&L, managing your talent pipeline, developing a business, having a strategy to really, grow that business. So again, all the roles I've done subsequently, and that's certainly when I went to Fujitsu, for example, yes, I was doing roles such as like leading the ServiceNow business there, but I had all that responsibility, right? So, and that's when I realized actually I love the technology piece, but I also love like the business piece, and I love the success of kind of growing a practice and growing a business. So I think, when you look at that ultimate goal, as I said, I think you're a little bit more open-minded about what the next step is. And, I sometimes kind of in my head, I have this picture of, there's you in the middle and a kind of a circle, like a ring around you, and you need that ring to be closed with all those skills that are needed in order to, do that ultimate role, so that when you decide to take that role, or you look at and evaluate those roles, you kind of look at it and say, oh, is this helping close a gap in my knowledge? Does this take me towards ultimately what I want to do? Because it's not always an upwards move as well. That's the other important thing, like some people, when I've moved to ServiceNow, for example, were like, oh, that was a bit of a strange move, I thought, for you to go into that kind of evangelist role. But actually, it was very, very mindful from my perspective, in that I wanted to, do way more on the thought leadership side of things. I wanted to do a lot more from a writing perspective. I wanted to kind of, really work with some of the kind of biggest companies on the end-to-end strategy piece and help ServiceNow do that. So it wasn't a weird or left field move for me. But, I guess in some ways people were like, oh, you're always going up. That's not an up move. It's more of a sideways move. Yep. Why did you do it? And I say, I think you have to be open-minded about that. And to be honest, it was a fantastic move for me. I had a great time at ServiceNow. And absolutely, I went from being kind of, a little bit nervous doing presentations, or very nervous doing presentations and things like podcasts and, briefings to analysts and all of that, to actually doing it kind of like really confidently. Though I always still to this day get nervous beforehand, but I think that's a good thing. Right?
It definitely is. It definitely is. And how many times do you think that you presented before you felt like just comfortable doing so?
It depends, I think when you see really amazing presenters, the other thing I think people forget is they assume that those presenters have kind of come on. It's the first time they've ever done that presentation. They've absolutely nailed it. The reality is they have done that talk track most probably multiple times, right? Or a variation of that talk track. So it becomes like really second nature. So the more you can your topic, and the more that kind of talk track, if you like, the easier it gets. And it becomes enjoyable. That's the other thing, I always find that once I'm into it, I always love presenting.
You find your flow.
Yeah, but I always find the first line of any presentation really difficult. That's the only bit I ever kind of have written down scripted that I might use is the first line, because I think if you get that first sentence out, then actually, and it lands well, you can kind of freestyle. You have the confidence to freestyle. If you sort of bumble to the start, it knocks your confidence type thing. And then I do things like when I was presenting, whether it was, to customers, whether it was like to analysts, or whether it was kind of like to like bigger forums, I would always practice and I would video myself. All right. And I would video myself and I'd also play it back, actually. So I would just listen to it, because I think sometimes when you do that, you realise that a message you're trying to land doesn't quite land when you're listening to it almost as a third party. So, I'll probably listen to this back and go, oh my God, but it's different in a presentation, obviously, because in a presentation, there's a defined kind of message you're trying to get across. But I always say to people, video yourself or record yourself and then listen to it back and almost listen back thinking, I'm in the audience, what am I hearing there, what message is landing, because it's a really good tool to kind of refine your messaging further.
Definitely. And I feel as well, I've noticed ServiceNow, like the knowledge event this year, they'll have people that have maybe just joined the ServiceNow community or just started or been trained through the startup program doing big presentations. And I think it's incredible that they provide that platform to people. But I'm also very impressed by people's courage to be able to do so even at the earlier stages of their career. And with your wealth of experience across, the industries, you've worked on the people side, you've worked on the technology side for a long time. How would you kind of define success within the ServiceNow environment?
Yeah, so I mean, ServiceNow environment, and going back to your point around the kind of, relatively new people coming in and doing huge presentations, it's the most supportive environment and community ever. And I think you have things like the user groups, you have all the different like development forums and all of that, and people will genuinely, are there to support you, which is always really good. So when somebody stands up, they've always got a bit of a mini fan club of people that are literally on their side wanting them to do a great job. And so that's really special about ServiceNow. And I've worked with other technologies and I haven't ever seen quite the same community that you have with ServiceNow. I think some of the kind of key things that will help you in ServiceNow is to be part of that community. And I know it's, again, it's a bit of a cliche, but that whole growth mindset, right? You have to keep learning all the time, right? You could do all of the certifications, you could, deliver that into a client, but unless you're staying at the forefront, that you become irrelevant quite quickly. So, it's super important. We've just looked at the kind of Q4 store releases, for example, and there's a whole load of new functionality. So ServiceNow, obviously not just releasing now every 6 months, there's lots of releases that come via the store. And so, you need to invest in yourself, take some time just to have a look. And I did it myself. And I think as a leader as well, I think it's very beneficial to stay up to speed with the latest developments from whatever technology that you're you're responsible for, but also to stay up to date with things like the industry trends as well, right? Because, we're seeing even more that kind of application of technology by industry. So you've almost got a major and a minor. I know I'm a specialist in this technology, I'm a specialist in this business process, but actually I can apply it in, manufacturing or FS, for example.
Yeah. And I think what a lot of listeners are going to get from this episode, and what I've taken personally just from getting to know you over the last couple of weeks, is that it's not just about letting your career carry you, but you need to carry your career and take a lot of time to kind of self-reflect, identify what areas that you could be better at, where you actually want to be and what you enjoy, what your passions are. Is there any other kind of last bits of advice that you would recommend to those that are curious about progressing within the industry?
I think find a good kind of mentor, I would say. I've had some amazing mentors in my life. I've had senior mentors, and I've had reverse mentors as well. And that is super, super useful. I mean, one of my most sort of valuable mentorships was an apprentice that mentored me. And
Wow.
He really helped me in terms of, again, if I was driving a team transformation, for example,
Yep.
I would talk it through with him, and I would talk through, well, this is what I think the benefits for the people are. And he'd be like, yeah, but, you need to consider this, and you need to consider that you're asking people to work in a much more agile way. You're asking them to question you. It doesn't naturally or come naturally to some people to kind of start questioning their boss about that. So,
Yeah.
How are you going to make it a real safe space for them? So you'd really challenge me on that. So be really open-minded about who those mentors in your life are. They don't even have to be in the industry either. So it's really good to have somebody like that. And I've talked about this quite a few times in my career, but, I've got a daughter and a son. My daughter's about to be 15, but literally when she was must have been about 6 years old, she said to me, why do they talk about out of the box thinking? Why is there even a box there? And I thought, exactly. Why? And it's because we constrain ourselves with, this is what we do and this is all we can do.
Yeah.
I love the fact that she was like, this shouldn't be a box that you're in. And I always talk about, and I said it earlier on in this session, there's nothing you can't do, right?
Yeah.
There is nothing you can't do. I mean, my son always says that to me, oh, yes, but you can't fly, can you? Yourself. And I'm like, well, technically you could put a jetpack on and fly. But, you can always get to that outcome. And I think having some belief in yourself, and I think women in particular are not so good, stereotypically, I know, but I've seen this a lot, good at sort of pushing themselves forward and having that belief. And I think what is really great in the community nowadays, which probably wasn't there actually kind of when I started my career, is that women actually want other women to do well, right? Yep. And actually promote each other as well. And I think that's a really, really positive thing. So I think, have some good mentors around you, literally have that belief that there's nothing that you can't do, right? Because the fact that, anyone that's gone into ServiceNow, they've learned a skill that they didn't have before. So you've already proved there's something you can do that you didn't have before, right? And then, thirdly, surround yourself with, other great women and also kind of allies really that help kind of push you forward and promote you.
I love that. So it's not just about not thinking outside the box, it's about not putting yourself in a box in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Yeah, well, what a great final message for the Women in ServiceNow podcast as well. So I really appreciate your time, Nerys. It's been fantastic to have you here as a guest. So yeah, thank you so much.
No, thank you. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.